Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to all of you who are live streaming. A special hello to my son Joaquin. Joaquin, who is 2.5, discovered last week that he can tune in from home. So hi, Joaquin. I'm really excited to welcome you all here tonight to our Askwith forum on assessing the dream, undocumented students in 15 years of Congressional inaction. I would also like to provide a special welcome to Act on a Dream, a student-run organization here at Harvard, at the college. Thank you. That advocates for immigration reform and welcomes students of all immigration statuses. Act on a Dream is currently running an advocacy campaign called #BetterImmigration, exposing to voters what is at stake for immigrants in this election. Act on a Dream encourages audience members to consider the true facts regarding undocumented immigrants before you vote. You can visit actonadream.org for more information. And I think that they've also distributed pamphlets outside of Longfellow Hall. So for those of you joining us for the first time, the Askwith Forums help to strengthen the intellectual life of the school through conversation, debate, and exchange of ideas. They're also a way to open our doors to welcome members of the greater Harvard community and also the general public. A couple upcoming Askwiths to be aware of. Next Wednesday, we're having a discussion based on our summer 2016 Ed Magazine article, Where Are the Teachers of Color? The panel will focus on the role of minority teachers in the school system and the challenges in recruiting and retaining them. So that's something that you'll not want to miss. And then on December 8th, speakers will discuss civic education in light of the deep divisions in American society, highlighted by the recent presidential election, the one we're in right now, in the thick of. They'll address some of the challenges around diversity, of divided parties, digital democracy, and the pressures for more global perspectives. This forum is in conjunction with the 42nd Annual Conference on the Association of Moral Education, AME, which will be held also here at HGSE. So please attend, and please stay tuned for future Askwith forums. In 1951, Langston Hughes posed a question fundamental to the predicament of African Americans living amid racial segregation and social marginalization. What happens to a dream deferred? Put in different terms, what are the long-term impacts of being only partially recognized members of society, and what effects do these forms of denial have on the individual psyche? As we count down the days until our presidential election, 14 and counting, and as we think about what is at stake as our country ponders the important question, who are we? Hughes's queries have relevance to many of us today. Certainly over the last several years, the plight of undocumented immigrant youth and young adults has captured the nation's attention. Legally integrated into our K-12 school system, yet excluded from powerfully defining and consequential rites of passage, their entry into adolescence and young adulthood is rife with exclusions, curbed access, and stigma. In 2001, 15 years ago, legislation was introduced in both the House and the Senate to provide a pathway to legalization to undocumented immigrants who had lived in the United States since childhood. This legislation, commonly known as the DREAM Act, has been introduced in Congress several times, but it's yet to be signed into law. Meanwhile, as Congress debates the futures of more than 2 million eligible young people, they've had no other choice but to carry out their everyday lives amid legally tenuous circumstances. So in a decade and a half characterized by a congressional stalemate and massive immigration enforcement, more than half of this population has made difficult transitions into adulthood. Many of the intended beneficiaries of the DREAM Act back in 2001 are now in their early to mid-30s. Some are actually have moved into their 40s. Many of them struggle to find a place in this country where they've grown up and called home. Many also struggle to carve out a life and to make ends meet, and also to help out their families. In my book, Lives in Limbo, I argue that undocumented status is a master status that overwhelms all other statuses and achievements. Indeed, many undocumented young people have excelled academically, and growing numbers are earning college degrees. But for many, the promise of the American dream has been elusive. But this is not a story of passivity. Over the last several years, undocumented young people have carried out what has been arguably one of the most important social movements of our time. They found each other through internet forums, in clubs on their college campuses, during organizing campaigns, and in their communities. They've worked hard to empower families and to build stronger communities, providing workshops to parents and training teachers, counselors, and university staffs. They've advocated for themselves, their families, and their communities, declaring themselves undocumented and unafraid. They've captured the hearts and the minds of university presidents, of business leaders, of elected officials, and the broader American public. They've compelled us to pay attention, some by walking across the country and others through their art. They've articulated complex and nuanced frames while embracing intersectionality and finding commonalities with other campaigns. And they've engaged in acts of civil disobedience, blocking traffic at times, staging sit-ins, and disrupting businesses as usual. But theirs is a cause that not only affects them, they belong to families and communities. They're connected to peers, to partners, to teachers, coaches, employers, and places of worship. These connections have also produced a potent allyship that has helped them advocate for broader inclusion and to move public opinion on this issue. Jose Antonio Vargas has called this the 21st century Underground Railroad. Allies through small and large gestures working together with undocumented young people. Assistance in the college process, helping to raise money for tuition. But these efforts have also been undertaken at scale. Scholarship funds, national internship programs, efforts to address the health and the mental health issues, spaces created to counter exclusions. Now, much of the immigration debate has focused on future actions. What policies should we craft to address those living here, and how should we address future flows? But tonight, we pause to look back, to reflect on the last 15 years. What have we learned? What have been the cost of inaction? And how have institutions, organizations, and individuals responded in the absence of immigration reform? I will now join our panel and introduce them and start our discussion. To my far left, Donald E. Graham, chairman of the board of Graham's Holdings Company, previously the Washington Post. He was publisher of the Washington Post newspaper from January 1979 until September 2000, and chairman of the paper from September 2000 to February 2008. In 1913, Graham co-founded the Dream.us, the nation's largest college access and success program for dreamers. In 3 years, the Dream.us is now running 2 scholarship programs and has raised over $91 million in scholarship money and currently has over 1,700 scholars nationwide. Don's philanthropic spirit and contributions have opened up countless opportunities to immigrant youth across the country. Graham previously served as chairman of the District of Columbia College Access Program, a private foundation which since 1999 has helped to double the number of DC public high school students going on to college and has helped to triple the number graduating from college. He co-founded the program along with major local businesses and foundations. Since its inception, DC CAP has raised over 13,000 DC students, has assisted over 13,000 DC students enroll in college and provided scholarships, totaling more than $33 million. After graduating from Harvard College, where he was president of the Harvard Crimson, Don Graham was drafted and served as the information specialist for the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam. He was a patrolman with the Washington Metropolitan Police Department from 1969 to 1970, and then he joined the Washington Post newspaper in 1971 as a reporter. He was named executive vice president and general manager of the newspaper in 1976.
Hey, I'm an under.
And really could go on and on and on.
Mine was this long.
Next, Angela Marie Kelly is the executive director of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and she's the senior vice president of the Center for American Progress. Angela's work has been focused on politics, progressive policy, immigration and integration policy, the media, Latino issues, and race and ethnicity. Before joining the Center for American Progress, Angie Kelly served as the director of the Immigration Policy Center, a research and rapid response organization that provides policymakers, academics, the media, and the general public with access to accurate information about the effects of immigration on the U.S. economy and society. Prior to that, Kelly was the deputy director of the National Immigration Forum, where she headed its legislative, policy, and communications activities and oversaw its operations. Next, Jose Antonio Vargas, no stranger to many of you, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, filmmaker, and media publisher whose work centers on changing the American identity. Jose is the founder and CEO of Define American, a nonprofit media and cultural organization that seeks to elevate the conversation around immigration and citizenship in America. He's the founder and editor of hashtag Emerging US, a digital platform that lives at the intersection of race, immigration, and identity in multicultural America. Hashtag Emerging US is the first ever media property owned by an undocumented immigrant. In June of 2011, the New York Times Magazine published a groundbreaking essay that Jose wrote in which he revealed and chronicled his life in America as an undocumented immigrant. A year later, he appeared on the cover of Time Magazine worldwide with fellow undocumented immigrants as part of a follow-up cover story that he wrote. He then produced and directed Documented, a documentary feature on his undocumented experience. And then in July 2015, MTV aired, as part of its Look Different campaign, White People, a television special that Jose wrote and directed on what it means to be young and white in contemporary America. And then finally is Julieta. For which I'm very sure I have her bio.
And here it comes.
Thank goodness there's one organized person.
Cut to the edits. My apologies. It's Julieta Garibay. Julieta moved to the United States at the age of 12 from Mexico City and lived in Texas for 20 years before moving to Washington, D.C. In 2005, Julieta co-founded the University Leadership Initiative at the University of Texas at Austin, one of the first undocumented youth-led organizations in the nation. Julieta was also a co-founder of United We Dream and has served in multiple other roles in the network. She's currently the campaigns director of United We Dream. Julieta holds a master's degree in science and public health, nursing, and a bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Texas. Please join me in welcoming our guests. So, in 2001, under the Bush presidency, there was broad hope for an immigration bill to provide some sort of pathway to legalization for millions of people living in the shadows of the United States. There was also a growing awareness of the plight of undocumented young people growing up in the United States and a bill to support them, as we've talked about. 15 years later, they're still living in limbo, and I want to start out by asking the panel, how did we get to where we are today? And I'll ask Angie first.
Thank you. Well, it was Senator Dick Durbin, who's a Democrat from Illinois and still in office, who gave birth to the DREAM Act. And he was inspired to do that because of a constituent, Teresa Lee, who was a brilliant high school student and had a remarkable gift for music. and she was accepted to Juilliard. And then she learned she was undocumented. And it was her mom who called Senator Durbin's office pleading, please help my daughter. She's so talented. That's why we came to this country. And it captured the heart of Dick Durbin, and it's never left. So he started this. He introduced the bill in August of 2001, and it was scheduled for its first hearing on September 12th, 2001. You can imagine the hearing didn't happen. In fact, there wasn't a hearing or any action on the bill until 2003, when it did get considered by the Judiciary Committee, and it passed, with Democrats and Republicans voting for it. But the Republicans that held control of the Senate floor and decided who, can decide what gets to go to the floor, never brought it to the floor. So when that Congress ended, as it ends every 2 years, that bill died. And that's been, unfortunately, kind of the repeating story, Roberto, of the DREAM Act. It has been on the Senate floor 2 times, in 2007 and then in 2010. It has always cleared more than 50 votes, but it has never hit 60 votes, which is what you need in order to be able to shut off debate in the Senate. And if you don't clear 60 votes, your bill dies. The bill was one time on the floor of the House of Representatives when it was controlled by Democrats in December of 2010, and it passed with 208 Democrats voting for it and only 8 Republicans supporting it. But then when the Senate considered it 10 days later, on December 18th, it didn't clear the Senate. The bill has always been part of comprehensive immigration reform, the big bill that has passed a couple times, again, the Senate in 2006 and then 2013. But as has happened most recently, the House of Representatives has refused to act, to refuse to move a bill forward. And until they do, we won't have a legislative solution. And why a legislative solution is so important is because only Congress can authorize green cards. And only with a green card do you have the right, the ability to be able to naturalize and become a citizen of this country. It's really important who controls Congress. And the executive branch, though, and I don't know if I'm going on too long, Roberto. Is this
That's
okay?
great.
Okay, good. If I'm getting an A from a professor at Harvard. Woohoo!
It's
Take
great
note.
context.
Take note. The executive branch, right, the president, what he can do is make decisions about where enforcement actions will happen against individuals and when they won't. And so Barack Obama, on June 15th of 2012, and a day I'll always remember, and I got to celebrate with you, announced that there would be executive action for Dreamers. It's called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Pop up your hands if you know about DACA.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And what it does is it says that if you come forward and you meet a number of very strict requirements, you have to have been in the United States by 2007. You couldn't be 16 years old. You had to be less than that when you came in. You can't be older than 30. Tough requirements. That you can get a 2-year work permit and basically a temporary reprieve from being deported, right? There's no green card. There's nothing permanent about what the president has given. It can be taken away. It can be taken away by the next person who will be in the White House at the end of January. About 750,000 people have come forward and applied and received DACA. They're working. They're making better wages. They're buying cars. They're improving their education. They're contributing to their family's income. It is Exhibit A of the benefits that we all accrue when people have even that much status. So it is imperfect, it's incomplete, it is not enough. But to me, it just lays bare for lawmakers to say, okay, like explain to me why you can't do this legislatively. So that's where we are, Roberto.
I said that we were going to only look back, but
I'm sorry.
No, but
No, I
I
only
want
did
you
look
to.
back.
So I said that we were going to look back, but I want to ask you a question
Okay.
about looking forward.
Sure.
Given the role that immigration has played, at least peripherally in this election cycle, kind of toxicity of this election cycle, and also in light of the Supreme Court decision early in the summer.
Yeah.
What are the prospects moving forward?
Well, let's start with the White House. We've got two presidential candidates with very different views on immigration. Secretary Clinton is in the White House in January, and I hope that she is. She will move forward on comprehensive reform. But as you all know, because you're very smart young people, she cannot pass a bill. It has to happen only with the cooperation of the House and Senate passing what can be two different versions of any piece of legislation, and then having the will to sit down with each other, conference out that bill, come up with one bill, pass them back again through the House and Senate, and send it to her desk. So I am ever optimistic that old dogs can learn new tricks, and that old dogs who get maybe reelected by a smaller margin than before, as more congressional districts have Latinos, for example, that are paying attention to what their lawmakers are saying, that there may be the will on the part of more Republicans to come forward and do the right thing, to come forward because of business asking for it, because as often conservative evangelicals really feel like that's the moral thing to do, or if they just want to save their political hide. I don't care really why they do it. I just want them to do it. So I don't know, but I'm banking on it, and I can tell you that the most powerful thing I've seen in all my years in Washington is the courage of the dreamers. You know, I'm really excited you're going to get to hear from these guys. They have just changed the rules, written their own playbook about how to do advocacy. Effective, powerful, staying true to your values in a way I've never seen before. And I can tell you, us older Washington types have learned so much.
You call yourself older.
I was not in the Vietnam War.
There's about two people in this room I regard as of a serious age.
Anywho, these guys are the real deal. Ask them the question, Roberto. If it happens, it's because of them, not because of me.
Yeah, so I you know, a lot of the public debate really happens at the 30,000-foot level, a great distance from people's everyday lives. But nevertheless, as I mentioned earlier, is that young people and their families have to carry out their lives as best as they can. So let's move, I think, from kind of bigger policy picture to really kind of life on the ground. And both of you have done really amazing work and have met probably hundreds, if not thousands, of young people and families, in addition to having your own stories. And I'll start with Jose. What have we learned from these last 15 years?
I'm going to go back a little bit to the question about 2001 when the DREAM Act was introduced. So that was in August. September 11 happened. And then October, I got accepted to an internship at the Seattle Times, a summer internship. And it was the first time I ever told an adult that I did not know. I remember the recruiter, her name was Pat Foote. And she called me to offer me the internship. And then I called her back and I said, I'm going to tell you something. I'm not here legally. I don't have papers. Because one of the requirements to get the internship was to drive. And I never had a driver's license. So I got so freaked out that I told her that I actually flew to Seattle, which I've never gone to before, just to meet her in person, just to look her in the eye in a diner and to have her promise to me that she will not tell anybody else. And she called, so we did that. And then when I got there, she told me, I've spoken to our lawyers. I never used your name. we can't take you. So then I told my superintendent, my high school superintendent, who's like been like a father figure, who Dawn actually met at one point. And Dawn and Rich Fisher, my superintendent, got me my first ever lawyer meeting, immigration lawyer meeting. And the woman, who's a lady in downtown San Francisco, she met with us and she said, there's nothing Jose can do but to go back to the Philippines, accept a 10-year bar, thanks to the Clinton administration, a 10-year bar, and then try to come back. And when she was saying this, I was sure that that's what I was going to do, right? Because, I mean, the lawyer says go back. So we go outside of the meeting, Montgomery Street, downtown San Francisco. I'm getting ready for this in my head. Rich Fisher goes, you're not going anywhere. Like, you're already here. You already graduated from high school. You're in college. You're doing a great career in journalism. We'll do everything we can. We'll protect you. You're not going anywhere. If he had not said that, I would have gone home to my grandparents, booked a flight to Manila, and left. Now, the question for me is, how many other Rich Fishers are out there? How many educators, superintendents? And mind you, this was 2001. Google had just kind of arrived, right? And I'm not Mexican, so people are already confused because of that. But to me, you know, and I have to say, like, Julieta has been doing this work. Julieta started, you know, we were talking about this. You started getting active on this work in 2005. Right. That's the first, after the first year, I went to the Washington Post, lied in all of my forms, and even lied to the owner of the Washington Post company.
I think it's over it. I think it's over.
I have never said this publicly, by the way, so sorry, Dawn. But here's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is, if we are to create a cultural space that leads to a political place, we're going to need more Don Grahams and Rich Fishers and all of these white, black, Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern, everybody across this country to think of immigration as with a moral clarity and with a sense of moral imperative. Like, to me, the only reason I am here is because of all of these educators who did not care about papers, who did not care about laws, and who just cared about the student in the class. And I wasn't some straight A student. I was actually pretty bad because I was so myopic about journalism that it was never really my priority. It was never to, like, get good grades. So I just think that, to me, looking forward, is what I'm hoping we get to that place, right? And that when I look at the LGBT rights movement, and the power of that movement trying to wake up allyship, right? The will and grace, like the grace in all the wills, right? I think that's really interesting. And I have to say, with Julieta, like, I remember when Julieta and I first met, I actually think it was for the Time magazine cover, right? When you went up to New York. So basically we called people up, go to New York, we're having a cover. And I remember the first thing I did when I met a bunch of dreamers was apologize. Because, you know, they were doing all the work while I was lying to get my jobs. And so what I've been doing for the past 5 years is kind of making up for all that lost time, right? But people like Julieta had been doing this work when the DREAM Act wasn't sexy, when nobody knew what it was. And I think hopefully we get to a better, again, clearer place in it.
Well, can we talk about all of this work? I mean, to think about a group of marginalized young people with a very giant stigma, right? To think that these young people came together largely in the beginning through the internet and social media, through chapters of their college campuses, and forged a movement with a lot of muscle nationally. Julieta, can you talk a little bit about your pathway through education and activism, and I think also what it's meant to be part of such a large movement? And United We Dream is the largest immigrant rights organization in the country. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. I'm a little overwhelmed being here. even to this day, I still get very sentimental, so no worries, I cry a little. But I got this. I think it's been definitely a journey. I started this work because I went to UT Austin, and I was supposed to be a nurse, and I grew up in Texas. And when you grow up in Texas, I don't know if anybody has grown up in Texas or is a Texan. Okay, I see some faces. There's this pride of being a Texan, right? And there is this pride of like law and order, and there is this pride of like, this is how you go in this country. And that's what I grew up on, right? And so even being a Latina, I was not proud. I was trying to go under the radar so I could actually survive. And so it's been definitely a journey of like going from, hey, I just want to practice nursing. And that's why I started organizing, and I didn't even know it was organizing because I was a nerd, I still am, but I would always be like very like straight A student, like I'm gonna be a nurse, and that's my plan for my life. And then I met amazing people like Mati Ramos, who's over there, like Cristina Jimenez, Walter Barrientos, Carlos Saavedra, Gaby Pacheco, who we kind of just came together and said like, this is where we're at. For a long time, I thought I was like many undocumented folks, that you're the only undocumented person that doesn't even know what to do. That is very scary, very overwhelming. And then you start meeting other folks, and to me, it was like a slap in the face of like, wake up, it's not about nursing. It's not about being able to practice your profession. It's about actually owning your humanity. It's about being wholesome as a human being. That no, I'm not only in a box of an immigrant, I'm a woman. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a woman of color. I'm an immigrant. I'm a proud immigrant. I'm proud of the courage that my mother had to bring me to this country, to fight through a lot of stuff and make it in this country. And so it's been a journey of like 15 years of really owning my whole self, of no longer saying like, oh, do I really want to say undocumented or unafraid? And so when I started 15 years ago, or 12 years ago, I was very afraid. I was very undocumented, and so it wasn't cool to say undocumented and unafraid. I still clearly remember one of the first articles that was written about us. There is like, literally looks like a mugshot of one of the other guys who was graduated from UT as a petroleum engineer, and myself. We were the first generation of graduates from UT Austin, and but we both look scared shitless. Like he's like, you see like her, like we are like so scared, and it was only for like a newspaper, Ahora Sí, en español, like who's gonna read it? But it was really scary, and I think it's been through the beautiful journey that I've been meeting other immigrant youth, realize that it's beyond practicing a profession. It's about people realizing that we are humans, that we should be treated as such, and that we want a life with dignity, a life where you don't have to go outside and worry about being deported. So it hasn't been easy, but I think the results have been amazing. It's that resilience that I think many of us take on. Is that courage that our parents had, and like that say, like, you know what, we're not gonna take no for an answer. And so when people told us, when the DREAM Act failed, and people were like, no, you cannot ask anything from Barack Obama. Like, that's not a good idea. You're never gonna get anywhere. Like, it's election time. Like, why would you do that? Like, the Latinos are gonna vote for him. Like, makes no sense. You're gonna fail. Immigrant youth said, no, we're not gonna take no for an answer. He promised immigration reform, and what has he done? He has deported our people. And so immigrant youth started doing civil disobedience and saying we're not going to take no for an answer. And I think the beautiful part of it is that we have been creative, innovative, and fearless, and said we're gonna get arrested if that's what it means to get some result. And so thanks to that courage of many, we were able to win DACA. And so it wasn't Obama waking up one morning in June and saying, oh, they're really nice, they're really cute. I'm gonna give him like a work permit. It was immigrant youth going to his offices It was immigrant youth doing civil disobedience and stopping status quo and saying, no, we're not going to stay quiet. You cannot go on deporting our people and think it's okay. And so it's been beautiful. As I was reflecting and I was like thinking about this, it was like, like 10 years ago, even like when I would hear any of the immigrant youth that I work with and the leaders that I work with saying like, oh, I'm about to graduate, it was always this like, oh, yay. But there was this like, oh, yay, crap, what are you going to do now? And I always remember telling my sister, like, I could always tell when many of the folks that I work with and that are my friends and that I call them brother and sister, like they would go in a deep of like depression. Because it was like, I'm going to graduate. It's the dream of my mom and my dad, and this is why we came to this country. But what am I going to do with a beautiful like diploma on the wall, and that's all it does. And it was like it was hard to see that on leaders that I had seen stand up and say, I'm telling my truth, but yet they went through depression once they actually graduated from college. Yeah. And so now when you see DACA, it was really exciting. I think in summer of 2012, when people were starting to apply, I remember going to one of the graduations of a friend, and I was like, what are you gonna do? And she was just like, her eyes lit up, and she's like, I have job interviews. And I was like, oh my God, you have job interviews. Like, it might be very like elementary to anybody else, but as undocumented youth who have seen this process, it was pretty amazing to hear someone else is gonna be able to practice their profession and grow and fly, and not have to worry about like, shit, am I gonna get deported tomorrow? Yes, it's not perfect, but it's been a pretty amazing journey. And then of course, I think this journey has also allowed us to say like, yeah, maybe I have DACA, right? But what about my mother or my father or a loved one who might not have family here in the US, but who's still undocumented and who could get deported? And so I think it's been that beautiful journey that has allowed us to say like, you can't just box us into, oh, it's all these dreamers that should get papers. It's now the movement saying like, no, it should be all of us. Like, why not? Why can't mothers and fathers and single working people be treated as human beings with all the rights? And so it's been 15 years. It's been amazing. It's been a lot of learnings, and I think I've been honored to learn from the movement is not to take no for an answer, and have the courage to say our truths.
Yeah, thank you for that. This whole panel has been around for a while and has seen kind of different kind of peaks and valleys within this discussion. Hope and then dashed hopes. Given all these developments, and I think particularly around some of the stuff that Julieta has been talking about, the kind of progression in this movement, how have these developments changed the conversation on immigration? And I'll throw it out to Dawn.
Well, I know less than anybody else on the panel, so I'm going to get my turn. But that is the important question, it seems to me. How's the conversation different today than it was 10 years ago?
He's asking me questions.
I'm a journalist.
I know you are.
You're surrounded by
reporters on the
it.
You have two reporters on the panel.
By the way.
I mean, look, if you had asked somebody 10 years ago, 5 years ago, do you know what a dreamer is? They'd say, oh, it's a person with aspiration, You ask somebody about a dreamer today, everybody knows what we're talking about, right? I mean, look how many of you put your hands up when I mentioned DACA. So that to me is the potency, right? It's the face, it's the story, it's the connection that, these two guys have just described so brilliantly. And it makes lawmakers uncomfortable. They're good at making people uncomfortable, and that's a great thing. I encourage them to keep doing that and not to take no for an answer. So I think it's that. And I also think that, for people who need to look at a balance sheet and think of it in economic terms, that there's a really good story to tell.
Angie, what's going to happen to the Republican vote in Congress post-Trump? Is it going to become more rigidly anti-immigration reform, or are some of them going to say we got to get rid of this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think some will remain rigid because that's in their DNA, sadly. But I think that there are an increasing number of congressional districts where you've got more people of color that are diminishing the margin of victory and those guys look at that and they realize, we got to do something. We got to do something. And I think that Donald Trump is like a skunk that has just left a stench in those guys, and that no amount of bathing is going to get rid of it. They got to work this issue right now. Where are you on it? I think that's what we got to ask them.
Yep.
And it'll really help if they wake up on November 9th and say, wow, we got killed by the Latino vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that will happen.
Julieta, you mentioned earlier families and others, families and communities who are not part of DACA. Mm-hmm. You and Jose didn't meet the age limit of DACA. And DACA at its best, right, is temporary and it's partial. And 750,000 people is pretty impressive, and this is 750,000 people who've been able to take giant steps towards the American mainstream, who've been able to help out their families and to help out their communities. But it's a portion of the population. How should we be thinking about DACA, about DREAM Act, and immigration reform in light of this larger community, when for such a long time the DREAM Act was framed really as a very narrowly tailored bill that would only impact a few, a small number? How should we be thinking about this?
I can tell you how not to be thinking about it. So when DAPA for the parents was announced, Obama went out there to the Rose Garden and said, we're going to go against felons and not families. And some of the work that I do is actually work with someone that does deportation cases that comes to me every single week and says, Juli, we got another deportation case of a mother, of a father, of a son, of a person who has made their life in this country. And so this whole thing of felons versus families, when we know that the system that we live in is criminalizing people of color, right? When we know in states like Arizona or Florida, if you get caught with fake papers, which I had, which I got, to be able to survive, you're a felon. You're a felon for trying to provide sustainability to your family. A felon, which means you're deportable in that instant that you get caught. And so for United We Dream is definitely being how do we make sure that, the system was meant to criminalize you. It wasn't meant to defend you. It was meant to say, let's get rid of the worst of the worst, and let's go with that. And so I think the challenge is, how do we make sure it's not only a few of us really talking about what does it mean to criminalize brown and black folks, that it has to be the entire system, the entire, the movement, right? When we know there is, that black immigrants are usually deported 5 times more than any other immigrant, when many times that's not talked about. And so what I know is that at the end of the day, what Obama has been doing for the past 8 years, he's deported 3 million people. 3 million people. When his promise was to fix immigration reform. When his promise was, I want to keep families together. Well, those 3 million people had a family. And so I think the question to all of us is, how are we going to really challenge that narrative of no, it's not about felons versus families. It's either, are you for humans or not? Are you for people having rights? Are you for people being able to live in this country without fear? And that's the question at the end of the day, because even as you move forward for 2017, and Hillary has a choice, right? Hillary, if she does become the president, she has a choice of saying, am I going to get rid of this legacy of Obama of being the deporter in chief, or am I not? And so I think that's what we need to be thinking about and worrying about, of like, what's going to happen. Is she going to continue with this whole felons versus families? When we know it's just this machine that has been created to get rid of people. And so I think it's a hard question to answer with one answer, but I definitely know how we cannot really move forward with having that discussion.
So I'm going to not push back, but like provide a little bit of context. So we're at Harvard. When most of you raised your hand who knew what DACA was, I can tell you that I was in Cleveland just a week ago and asked anybody what the DREAM Act was, and maybe 10 people raised their hand out of 400 people. Because they don't know what immigration is. They think the DREAM Act is law, amnesty is the lay of the land. And, I would argue that Donald Trump, when we look back at what's happened in the campaign, I would argue as a journalist and as someone who's undocumented, that he was brilliant in picking immigration to be the central part of his campaign. Because people don't know what it is. All they know is that, North Carolina has added almost 1.2 million new people in the past 15 years, most of whom are Latinos and Asians. And for a lot of people, immigrants are immigrants, right? Like, even though there's people who make illegal, it becomes this thing, right? So for me, figuring out how we can expand, like, lawmakers react to the political space. So how do you change that political space, right? And what other voices, while United We Dream and other organization groups keeps pushing and not taking no for an answer, while that's happening in DC, what needs to happen in community centers, in churches, in schools, at libraries? Like, what needs to happen in our own communities to create a space to change that? I think that, to me, is a really, really critical question. Because so let's review this in light of Black Lives Matter, right? The 1964 Civil Rights Act didn't guarantee full equal rights to Black people in this country. Do we actually believe that passing immigration reform is all of a sudden going to make all these immigrants welcome in America? In the next 50 years, 88% of the total population growth of America is going to come from mostly Latinos and Asians, many of whom have undocumented people in their families. So for us, for me, as a journalist, as a filmmaker, as someone who cares about narrative, figuring out how we integrate that, into the larger conversation is crucial. I was just in an interview this morning because I'm going to Michigan next week and did this radio interview. And the host was like going on and on, a progressive host was talking about like immigrants built America, and look at these hardworking immigrants, right? And I said, let me push back on this a little bit. When we say immigrants built America, we are leaving two fundamental groups of people behind. Native Americans and Black people who were imported in this country, right? That's that. When we say immigrants are so hardworking, which is true, but what is that quote from Hamilton? Immigrants, we get the job done. I get that. But like, what message are we sending? Are we sending that immigrants are here just to do the work? Are we just commodities to you, right? Because we're so high achieving and we have valedictorian, whatever, right? Or are we also saying, oh, U.S. citizens are so lazy, so we need immigrants to come here and do the work? So I said this on air today because I think post whatever happens on November 8th, we all need to insist on the complexities of these conversations and the nuances that are needed, so we don't just settle for simplistic narratives that have gotten us to where we are. As an immigrant, I don't want to just be seen as low-skilled, high-skilled. I don't want to just be seen as hardworking. I want to be seen as a human being, right? And what we even haven't discussed here is, I talked about this last night a little bit, it's this idea of why people even move. How do we connect this story to the 244 million people who are migrants around the world, who are moving? Why are they moving? It's not to come here and be called criminals. So I think that, to me, is really important to move, especially in an institution like this that cares about policy and you all read and all that kind of stuff. So, but now how does that translate, in Dearborn, Michigan when I go next week, or when I go to Alabama in 2 weeks? Like, how is that going to translate, right? So I just thought I should
Jose,
add that.
I want to pick up on a point that you made earlier, and I think that the spirit of the earlier part of your comment was that, I mean, certainly as we debate immigration, is it going to be a year or two? First 100 days? Is it going to be 10 years? Last spring, some really smart people that I know were projecting 2026 for immigration reform. So I've made this point. I make this point in my book. As this conversation happens, people have to carry out their everyday lives. And certainly as kids and their families have to carry out their everyday lives, and Jose has made this point in other places about this important, critical underground railroad of teachers, of counselors, of leaders of faith, of organizations and institutions who, since the beginning of this movement, have played a really critical role. And I want to turn to Don, and Don is really humble about his role. But in service to this broader conversation about allyship and about partnership between immigrants and the larger community, just want to ask you, Don, if you could talk a little bit about the Dream.us Scholarship Fund. What was the impetus for it, and what have you learned along the way?
Well, I've been thinking about what I would want to say to this group. I was 50 years ago, I was in your chairs, undergraduates. I just skipped my 50th reunion because I've created a coup. Harvard has lost my mailing address and my email. And when you graduate, you're going to learn about something called the fundraising department at Harvard, and having them lose all that stuff is great. So I haven't been back much. But I have two things I want to say to you. One is about our very modest and self-effacing moderator. For those of us who study and think about immigration, Roberto Gonzalez is a giant. If you haven't read his new short book, Lives in Limbo, it is like being kicked in the stomach. If you aren't yourself an immigrant, don't know undocumented immigrants closely, please read it. It's extraordinary. And it reflects scholarship of a careful, close study of a whole lot of people that this university ought to be so proud of. Now, the second thing I have to say to you is really a request. With a representative of Julieta's organization and a fundraiser a man named Henry Munoz, a businessman from Texas who raised most of the Latino money for Obama's reelection in 12, and Carlos Gutierrez, a Republican. Our joke is that Carlos is the chairman and only member of Republicans for Immigration Reform. We started out just 3 years ago to try, because we were all aware of the hideous wrong of undocumented kids being unable to get to college. We set out to try to raise a little money, and to our astonishment, we've raised a lot of money. I know there are students here who are yourselves undocumented, and I know that many of you are interested in the issue and interested in undocumented kids. What I wanted to say is this. The Dream.us is not a scholarship fund that sends people to places like Harvard. What we decided to do is to chop up the money we raised into amounts that would pay the full tuition at the best, very low-cost universities in the United States. So we give $25,000 scholarships, but that pays full tuition at the City University in New York, Miami-Dade College in Florida, the Cal States in California, quite a few UTs in Texas, not the one Julieta went to, but the less costly lower-end UTs. We're in 14 different states, and in the states that have passed punitive legislation against Dreamers, like the state of South Carolina, where Dreamers are banned from every state college, even if they pay. Like Georgia, where Dreamers are banned from the four-year state colleges. Like Mississippi, I think it's Idaho that also bans them. Missouri passed disabling legislation. Alabama. North Carolina has changed Dreamer access to its community colleges 5 times in the last 2 years. But for Dreamers from those states, we actually now have 2 states, and we will have more in 2 weeks, that are offering the equivalent of in-state tuition, room and board at a state college, which we are paying. So what I want to wave my arms and say is this: if you know Dreamers who want to go to college and cannot go for financial reasons, the dream.us is starting our next scholarship round for both these programs. New York State students going to CUNY, or South Carolina students going to Eastern Connecticut State University and Delaware State. And we'll have 2 other partners in that program come November. November 15th, our scholarship round starts. It'll be open till around the 1st of February. But why do I say that, why am I saying this to a bunch of students at Harvard? I think we are the largest scholarship program for Dreamers in the country in numbers. I don't know whether people offering scholarships to very expensive places may be paying even more. But we have a lot of scholarships available. We're a 3-year-old organization. Very few Dreamers have ever heard of us. Gabby Pacheco is our whirlwind social presence on Facebook and Twitter, and a whole lot of people follow Gabby and know of her. And Univision has been wonderful. Other Dreamer organizations have been wonderful in getting out the message. But if you know and care about Dreamers, please help us get the word out. And thank you.
Don, can I ask you why it's important for you to do this? Why it's important
Well,
to you
it's
that
funny,
you do this?
you gave my biography in just the right order. I was running a scholarship program for all the public and charter school, high school students in Washington, D.C., so I know a little bit about financing college for lower income students. I don't know as much as, I'm not an expert, but I have a lot of exposure to it. And anybody else here from D.C.? I bet there is. Okay, we can tell them a little about what it means not to be from a state, right? So think about this. Our students graduating from Washington, D.C. schools, we are out of state everywhere. We do not have a state university system to access. So I learned growing up what it means to be forced to pay out-of-state tuition. Well, there are only 20 states that have given Dreamers the right to access in-state tuition. There's a bunch of others like Michigan that are kind of soft, where nobody's passed the legislation, but the universities will let you pay in-state anyway. But so we were raising attendance rates all over DC, except for this one growing pocket of students, the Dreamers, who couldn't go. Yeah. This seemed to me wrong. I was a freshman in 1962, and the next year, someone named Robert Moses from SNCC came and talked on this campus about what was going about the situation of African Americans in Mississippi, and a whole bunch of my class followed him down there. And some of the same colleges whose doors were shut to African Americans then are shut to Dreamers now. And I'm not going to compare the situations of the two. They're not the same. They're not similar. But you want to talk about the most discriminated against group of students in the United States today, it is undocumented kids. Just no question about it.
We're running late. I could have this conversation for 3 hours with this group, and I wish we had more time. But we've got about 5 more minutes, and I just want to ask each of the panelists whether immigration reform or a DREAM Act or something similar is passed in the next couple of years or it's 10 years, what needs to be happening? Kind of both at the legislative level, but also on the ground.
Angie?
What do people need to be doing?
I'll start and get out of the way. Immigration reform has got to pass, and I think, I hope and pray that every one of you is going to vote that we're not going to have this. I don't know if she's good enough. I wish Bernie was still running, kind of stuff. No, I'm serious. If the only good outcome for this election is that Donald Trump becomes perhaps the biggest loser in the recent history of presidential elections, and the Republicans say, wow, that was a mistake. What do we do now? But please, this is a chance to be part of history. This guy is historically bad, and I don't think we'll argue a whole lot about that. So if that's the case, if there's a big win in November, I do think there's a pretty good chance immigration reform passes. I just pray that whatever else is part of immigration reform, that opens educational opportunities for these students to whom all the doors are shut right now, if only because they can't borrow. Those of you who will graduate with an uncomfortable amount of debt, think if you couldn't borrow a cent if you had to try to pay the cost of some place like this.
Yeah. Angie?
So if we are in a place where comprehensive immigration reform legislation has passed, and the DREAM Act is included, and there's good regs and there's good implementation, then I think it's like the real work begins. Because the conversation around the rules and regulations of a broken immigration system that hasn't been updated for 25 years, like that's important, but that's kind of like the middle chapter of the story. The first chapter is, why are people moving? The 244 million people that Jose, like, what is going on? And how do we treat refugees? Right? It is a question that is staring us in the face in this country when you look at the murder rates of countries in Central America.
Yep.
And Mexico stopping them from going through Mexico. That's why some of the numbers have gone down.
Yep.
It's not because things are better there. So there's that important first chapter. Why do people leave in the first place? Then there's the last chapter, right? Which is kind of a cool one about this country, and really the genius of this country, that we are this unfinished experiment that I really believe in and I love. And I'm so glad that my parents chose so many decades ago to come here and to give my brother and sister a chance to live here. But how we integrate, how we get people to participate in the civic life of this country, how we treat one another.
Yep.
I mean, that to me, like, that's the chapter I want to go to. So that's what I hope happens after comprehensive reform passes.
So Angie, I've said this before, but Angie was like one of the first people I met after I came out as undocumented. We had breakfast at the Ebbett. What is that place?
It's a terrible place.
What is it called? Odd and Ebbett?
The old Ebbett Grill. It's
There.
right near the White House. Everybody goes there, but
Everybody
the
goes
food
there.
is so bad. And he wanted to go there.
Did I go?
But you totally picked it. But I was so starstruck by you.
Oh God. So she was. I met with her for breakfast, and she said, "You're a journalist. You've made one documentary. Like, stay in that storytelling thing that you do." So that's why I try not to talk about policy, and I'm a reporter, so I'm very good at deflecting. So I try not to do that. So I'm gonna actually head to the last chapter that you said, which for me, as someone who cares about narrative, cares a lot about, which is the integration and how does that happen. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by actually infiltrating people who do tell stories, to tell more inclusive stories, right? So for us, for example, at Define American, the thing that I'm most proud about right now is we're heading the biggest campaign based in LA to try to get screenwriters and producers and directors to better integrate immigrants, documented and undocumented, in shows, right? In television shows, in movies, and that has to start at the Writers Guild of America, the Producers Guild of America. Actually, right now, I'm in the process of being a member of the Writers Guild of America, but they've never had an undocumented member before, so this is getting all kind of weird. But how do we introduce those storylines, right? And Julieta mentioned about there's 600,000 undocumented Black immigrants in this country that are never part of the conversation. Last week when I was in Akron, I had met a young man who, in front of 400 people, outed himself as undocumented, and he's from Ukraine. So he kind of shocked the entire room because he's like hipster white dude, gets up and tells everybody he's undocumented, and everybody's literally goes like, what? And then I say, I told you they're not from Mexico. Like, but you know what happens? And I'm not outing him or anything, but like, well, not in this way. But I get an email from him 2 days ago talking about mental health, which we don't really talk about, right? Like, and I try not to talk about it because it gets me, as a 35-year-old, you know, we don't even, the weight of that I can't even tell you.
It's all over Roberto's book.
It's all over Roberto's book, absolutely. When actually, I would argue, I mean, I would, back to what Don was saying, that is, for me, right now, the definitive book on young undocumented people in this country, by far. So everybody please read it. But the wealth, I mean, but the weight of that, and you're looking at someone who's considered like a good, high-achieving immigrant, who I've been trying to like declare independence from since I got called that, right? So I just think and I'm so glad, Andrew, that you mentioned, you know, we are in the heart of a global migration crisis, and I think this needs to be put in context to that, right? And the fact that this country, and you know, if you look at the number of refugees that we've decided to accept, I mean, I don't. So my hope is that for all of you, since we are at this school, all the educators out there who, you know, there's that great quote by Graham Greene, right? And in every childhood, there's a moment when a door opens and lets the future in. To me, teachers are those doors, opening every door, every window, every possible thing. Please, right? Your advocacy, the fact your vocalness, all of that to me is what it's going to get us through this next generation and this next few years of what's going to happen.
So I was able to adjust my status 3 years ago, and it was after going through domestic violence. And to me, as I got my stamp saying, like, you're a resident now, I felt really mad. I was just like, I don't understand how you have to just justify or like show there was enough abuse to be able to adjust your status. And so I share this because to me, that's what we really need to think about. Do we want a country of laws that are asking folks to show you've suffered enough to be able to adjust your status, to be able to see your humanity? And so it's a long-term process. It's a long-term commitment, and to me, it's a life commitment of like, how do we change this, right? How do we make sure, because we know that even if immigration reform passes, as Kelly has said, like, it's not gonna change the way I'm treated or we're treated in the street. It's not gonna change the way my mom is treated because she has an accent in Texas, even though now she's a US citizen, right? And so I think to many of you is taking that challenge and saying, what am I gonna do, right? At the end of the day, we need to continue building on the ground. At the end of the day, I know the cases that we win on deportations, the work that we've been able to do is because people on the ground were organizing. They were telling their neighbor, their compadres, anyone that they knew about their truths, and then telling them what are you gonna do about it. And so as you go out to the polls, which I'm expecting and I'm hoping everyone goes out to the polls, you really think about how the vote is only one piece of a long-term commitment on how do you really change America. And so it's a long-term commitment, but it's really willing to be on the ground, changing the perspective of what it means to be an immigrant and why it matters. And so, yeah. It's going to be a long journey, but I think people willing to tell their truth, to say no when there's a bully like Trump, to say no when there's a bully and abusive husband, to say no when someone's speaking out of terms or speaking against someone else. So it's a challenge that you all have, and that I hope I continue doing.
So let's open up the conversation. We've got mics on either side. So if people want to step up to the microphone, you can queue in the back of the microphone.
Let's do it.
Jackie, please.
Thank you so much for that very inspiring set of comments. So I wanted to ask a question about strategy moving forward. It's often said that DACA was a sort of low-hanging fruit for the administration, you know, because these are innocent children who came here, no fault of their own. They didn't jump any queue. They didn't choose to come. So if you are going to persuade a hostile public that somebody who is illegal deserves better, this is the greatest kind of candidate population. But unlike some of you, I'm less confident about what might happen with a Clinton administration. And remember the other Clinton administration where promises were made about Haitians, which were broken again and again. So I'm just wondering, what are the strongest arguments for moving beyond, you know, the DACA population to a broader constituency, even DAPA? But, you know, populations where there clearly was some decision by an actor or a set of actors to break the law and to come in. What are the strongest arguments that are going to be put forward to hold the Democratic Party or the new administration to the promises that it's kind of easy to make now when you have an opponent like the opponent they have?
You're the strategist.
Oh, well, thanks. I'll start, but others jump in. I think the strongest arguments for why we need comprehensive reform is that we have an immigration system that hasn't been updated since 1990, when fax machines were all the rage, and that for a country with as dynamic an economy and changing needs, that's just absurd. And that what we have in reality is a stop sign at one part of the border, and then 25 yards in, we've got a help wanted sign. And the way I try to describe how dysfunctional our immigration system is that for the entire United States each year, there are only 5,000 visas for people who work in restaurants, will drive me to the airport, took care of my kids when they were little, taking care of my grandmother now. We only have 5,000 visas for workers in those categories. And so there is a fundamental mismatch. We also have an extraordinary amount of resources at the border. So much so that what was once a circular migration pattern has stopped. People are here. The average undocumented person has been here for 13 and a half years. So as I like to say, these are not accidental tourists who decide to stay an extra week in Disney or go visit the Grand Canyon. These are folks who are here. They're here, and 40% of them live in families. Yeah. The presence of unauthorized workers means that bad guy employers will pay you less, and they won't hire the U.S. worker. And that's why organized labor is completely supportive of comprehensive reform. Immigrants have lower criminality rates than any other group. So these charges that Donald Trump likes to put out there, right, where he makes immigrants the other and associates them with taking your job and being a criminal, they're lies. So those, to me, are some of the stronger arguments that can get to where people are, allay their concerns. They're all true. And at the end of the day, though, it's not enough. I've been making those arguments for a really long time, guys. At the end of the day, it is what you've heard from these guys. And it's what you do. It's what you say. It's what when someone asks you, so what'd you do on Tuesday night? You tell them a little bit about this. And the next time you hear somebody talking trash about immigrants, you're like, no, call bullshit on it. Right? And then be teachers. Yep. Be teachers. I'm married to a teacher. I have a family of educators. And what you do, that's really what changes America.
Yes, sir.
Well, there's nothing moral about breaking the law or expecting to be rewarded for it, or calling somebody a skunk who opposes it. I don't think that's a very civil way to treat opponents of illegal immigration. However, as the last question alluded to, this DREAM Act is a Trojan horse to get comprehensive amnesty for every illegal alien criminal in this country. So it's not just about the DREAM Act segment of the population itself. If you don't draw the line there, then it's going to open the floodgates. But there is another way, isn't there? After all,
Is there a question here?
yeah, President Eisenhower had a better plan, didn't he? He had comprehensive deportation with his commander, General Joe String, and it worked very effectively. He got rid of all of them. So we don't have to accept that this is a given fact in that we have to accept this flagrant violation of our immigration laws. Deportation does work, so why not try it?
I'm sorry, so what's the question?
We should pursue deportation, right, and
Well,
that's
sir,
the
I'm
best
not going
form
anywhere.
of immigration reform. And to say that it doesn't work or it can't work is simply a myth of your own.
know, I respect you for coming here. I respect you for speaking up. I would respectfully suggest read Roberto's book. I'm not kidding, and here is why I suggested.
Why do you assume that I haven't?
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Okay,
You
what'd
think
you think of
that's
it?
an automatic?
Did you notice then that the parents of the young people he writes about, as Angie just said, have been in this country for 20 or 25 years?
Illegally in this country for 20 and 25
Right.
years.
And what about the children?
Look,
Did
Mexico
they-
and the Philippines are democratic countries.
Yeah,
Go back and make them
so
better.
Roberto mentioned that
Or you can apply from it.
Roberto mentioned I'm an ex-cop. I've locked up people for breaking laws. I believe in enforcing the laws. I didn't arrest their children. And in this case, you are looking at somebody. One thing I learned from Roberto, the average DACA recipient came here at the age of 6, which means half of them were younger. Now, what do you say to that kid? They grow up, they go to high school, they're the valedictorian, they're the president of the class. Mm-hmm. And you're going to say because you followed your mother when you were in diapers, you ought to be punished, you ought to have all these restrictions on your activity?
Yeah, you could return to your country of origin, and you can apply from there like everybody else. And if their parents
I
made
think
the
we'll just have
transition to this country,
I think
they
we'll
can
have
make
to
the
agree.
transition back to
we
the...
arrive at a somewhat different...
Those are democratic
sir.
countries.
arrive
There is
at a-
no
I think we'll
reason
have
why
to
they
agree to
can't make their way...
disagree.
Yeah.
We have a
But
question here.
I appreciate your speaking up, I really do.
Hi, good evening. My name is Asil, and I'm a student here in the master's program. Thank you for invoking humanity in this, because I think that was a good reminder of why this discussion is not just about policy, it's about humans. I'm a child of Lebanese immigrants who were documented, who settled in Dearborn first, so I hope you enjoy the food next week. But my question is more about capacity building at the community level, because you invoked that was kind of the next big story. Do you have suggestions or examples that you can point to of how we can change public perception of immigration reform at the community level?
So there's actually an organization that Define American works with a lot called Welcoming America. They're pretty active in Michigan, I believe, especially because Michigan is home to the largest Arab American community in the country. For me, and again, as someone who's I'm from Mountain View, California. I got there before Google got there. So I'm a proud Mountain View, California resident, and I firmly believe that things happen locally. So in immigration circles, we call them integration policies, like how to better integrate immigrants. For me, it's just what it means, what does it mean to be a good neighbor, right? So for Welcoming America, a lot of it is figuring out how to better program community centers, libraries, and integrate kind of immigrant events, places where people can actually see each other. Like in Ohio, for example, Welcoming America profiles immigrant business owners, right? And the U.S. citizens that they hire. Actually, right now, I'm actually a business owner. So I am employing about 20 people as an undocumented immigrant, right? That's a reality that most people don't really know. For me, though, the key thing, and Don, I'm privileged enough to be...
There's 2 business owners here.
And he's a much bigger one. I'm like a small one. But Don, I'm privileged enough to be on the advisory board of the Dream.us, and one of the things for me that, as we move past the election to really think about is how do we build the allyship among educators? There's a group called E4FC, Educators for Fair Consideration, that to me has been the primary network for teachers like you who care about undocumented kids. How do we grow that network? And how do we grow it in places where we really need to grow it? Right? I'm always amazed when I go to places and teachers are usually the ones who go up and they're like, I'm mentoring this 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15, and they're the ones who can, the student doesn't even say anything. Does the teachers just say everything? Like, we need more of those, right? One last thing about what we had just witnessed, because I have been very deliberate in trying to go on Fox News as much as possible, and actually at Define American, next year we're doing a conservative talk radio strategy, so how do we get more conservative, more undocumented people in conservative talk radio? There are absolutely, for me, facts, right? There are some people that you can change their opinion through facts, right? When I bring my tax forms from H&R Block, when I bring the letter that I get from the Social Security Administration about, hey, this is how much I paid. They're like, what are you talking about? How come we don't hear about this on NPR, right? That. There are some people that you're gonna change hearts and minds about, the human dignity of this and that I haven't seen my mom for 23 years, right? There's that. But it really is gradation, right? And I think the community intervention is where I see the biggest investment having to be. And I had 2 years ago, I got arrested in Texas. And it was the longest time I've ever been without my iPhone, without my phone. Because, they take everything away, and I have to sit there surrounded by Central American boys without my phone, just looking at everybody and facing myself, which is really dangerous, right? And, I started thinking at one point, if you don't want me, I'm just going to leave. I've already gone to your schools. I've already, my 5 years at the Washington Post taught me everything I need to know about journalism in terms of just the skills of it. I can be a journalist anywhere. I'll go to the Philippines, the Philippine president is going a little crazy. So I'll be a journalist there, right?
Don't go there.
Let me go do that. And then when I got out, I started thinking, wait a second, no. Right? In the same way that the history of this country has been written by people who have been excluded from it. From black people, women, Jews, Italians, Irish. This is why we're staying. Right? This is why we're not, quote unquote, self-deporting. Never mind that you don't seem to want to acknowledge that you need us just as much, as you want to kick us out. Right? But I actually think the fact that immigrants have to get up every day, right, and hear what we hear, and that we choose to stay, and that we provide for our families, and that we honor the sacrifices of the people who did what they did for us to be here, I can't think of anything more American than that. And that's why we're staying.
Oh, can I just do a quick plug-in? I don't see you anymore, but if you want to connect to United We Dream, we have campaigns, anything from stopping deportations to doing campaigns on anti-287G, collaboration between ICE and local enforcement.
Yep.
We, of course, are doing a lot of work on get out the vote stuff, so you can plug into United We Dream and check us out. And in regards to self-deporting, I self-deported right after high school, and I lived in Mexico for 1 year. And I was told I was not Mexican enough, that I was too Americanized, that I didn't speak Spanish well enough to be Mexican. And so in that year, I realized my mom was still here in the US, and I said, you know what? I am, as we say, de aquí, de allá. I'm from here, I'm from there. And that's regardless if you like it or not. And so I am choosing to make the US my home. And so, yeah, I've tried to do the self-deportation. It didn't work after you grow up in this country and your family and your loved ones are here. So it's a great advice, but it doesn't work. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Claudia, and I am one of those people that's on the ground. I'm a guidance counselor here in Boston. I graduated from here, and I've been organizing guidance counselors around undocumented students.
Yay.
Which has been really awesome. It's really awesome work to get to do. I was an undocumented student when I was in junior high school, and was able to I had access to getting my papers. But I've had I started working with undocumented students, and I didn't know what to tell them to click on online applications, on college applications, and I figured that if I didn't know, as someone that had been undocumented and was an organizer and fighting for justice, then my peers probably didn't either. So I've been doing some training of guidance counselors on how do we support students to get financial aid. I hadn't heard of the scholarship, so I'm going to forward that on to people that I know. How to apply to college, et cetera. And then we also did a 1 day or 1 week of action where educators across Boston Public Schools created these, I think we got them from United We Dream, Unafraid Educator posters.
Yep.
And said, this is who I am, and I support undocumented students. And so I have a whole bunch of guidance counselors that are kind of looking to me for leadership. And I'm not sure what else to do. There isn't currently a bill here in Massachusetts. So I'm wondering from you, what else should I be doing with these guidance counselors that are on the front lines, that are working with students, and that want to go to bat for their undocumented students? And aside from helping them apply to college and saying publicly that we support undocumented students, I'm not sure where else to go now.
Part of the work that we do at United We Dream is providing trainings for teachers to make it dreamer friendly, and that's what we call it, dreamer friendly zones, where it's incredible when you actually go to a teacher and say I'm undocumented, and they know, or they at least listen to you. I was my teacher was the first person that I came out and said I'm undocumented, and I'm sure I used the word illegal. But just knowing that your counselors and your teachers are actually are listening to you, know what it means, can guide you at least to say there is dream.us, there is United We Dream. I know there is not an in-state bill right now, but I know the student immigrant movement here in Massachusetts is definitely thinking of what does it look like for the next ledge session to fight for in-state again. And so there is plugins, definitely connect to United We Dream. We have trainings and toolkits and stuff.
I would love to talk to you though after this, because I think just even figuring out how to train other guidance counselors who aren't here,
Yes.
what kind of, because again, especially when I've been spending a lot of time more in the South because I'm doing this film thing, and I'm just amazed at how many people, there aren't really a lot of resources in a lot of the places that I go to in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. Right? So I bet you if you had something online that people could look at, that they could download, and then you could even do a Skype thing, that would be so helpful. Also check out e4fc.org. Well, let's talk after.
Yeah. I started creating a document called Things I Wish I Knew as a guidance counselor supporting undocumented students. So
That's awesome. But thank you for doing what you do.
Good.
We've got about 3 minutes, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Peniche. Just to be really fast, I came to the U.S. a month right before 9/11. I stayed here until my sophomore year of college, and then I decided to self-deport. They don't want me here. Mom and Dad, we don't have anywhere to live. E-Verify was being implemented. Went back to Mexico, had a horrible experience, pinche pocha, if you miss the U.S. so much, why don't you go back? And the only way I was able to go back was to infiltrate a detention center in Arizona. There, I was able to see what you've been able to see, that this is more than me just not being able to pay or go to college. This is a bigger monster that's profiting from our families. So while I'm still trying to heal from that, through sociology, I've been able to learn that we're not the first to be oppressed.
Nope.
This has been happening for centuries.
Yep.
But how do we heal these new dreamers? Because things are changing now and things are getting worse. Before, we came here with our parents, either being smuggled in the border or by overstaying our visas. But now we're having a lot of unaccompanied minors who have been put in detention centers, who have experienced a lot of inner fragmentation and want to be able to achieve higher education, but at the same time, they're still digesting what they were experiencing in detention centers. So what can I do as someone who's coming of age, who is still undocumented, to help this, here in Boston, where there's a lot of resources, and in my town, that's Revere, it's ruled by Italians that forgot that they were immigrants and just tend to be really racist.
We've got about one minute
I think,
to answer a very complicated question.
I mean, when I started in the movement, like I felt I was like alone, and then meeting a lot of immigrant youth, like realizing that we were not alone, and this like unspoken like connection that you don't even have to explain what it is to like be afraid or what it is to hide your some money under your shoes so that if you get caught, you have some money on you. But it's this unspoken truth that you can really just, I think like I truly believe in therapy, and I feel like those like. When you have those groups and you talk through what happened, that you're able to provide that space, that intentional space, that safe space that says, let's share what happened, let's talk about it, let's cry about it. And then once you're able to like heal and talk through it, then think of like, okay, so what do we want to imagine? What do we want to imagine for us? And how do we build towards that? And so I think it's a long process, but it's a beautiful process where you're able to say like, you know what, it is really fucked up what we went through. It is really sad. But I think that resilience that you're showing right now, it's what gets people through, right? That willingness to say, like, this is my story. And I can assure you that maybe someone in this same room is thinking of maybe going up to you and wanting to talk to you to say, like, I went through that. Because that's what usually happens when you share your truth. Someone else says, like, I'm not ready to say it out loud, but I can go up to you and say it. So it's really courageous that you're sharing. And I would just say, like, build your own group. Like, do it at home in un cafecito. Like, do it at a park. Like, that's how United We Dream started. Like, with groups, like meeting like at churches or whatever we could to talk about how we were feeling and what was happening in our lives, and then started building into how do we build this movement? How do we continue fighting? How do we make sure that we're at the table making decisions on what are the policies that are affecting us? But it starts with first healing, and then being able to move forward.
Thank you.
I'm sorry that we have to cut. We're out of time. I want to first thank the panelists. Thank you all for coming out. And I'm sure that folks can stay around for a little bit if people want to ask questions.
TheDream.us. Please check it out. The scholarship.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.